Chris Gerlacher. I'm a journalist with Prediction News. I've been covering prediction markets full-time since 2024. And when I was a gaming journalist covering sports betting, I was also covering the exchange model and Kalshi's early launch back when there was a bright line between sport trade, offering contracts on sports, and Kalshi staying out of that, at least until early 2025. I got my start on exchanges and PredictIt as well. I was writing about the midterms with PredictIt's odds, so I found my way there before many of the commercial contracts did. I think a lot of the traders in the room probably didn't a bunch of y'all get your starts on PredictIt as well? And yeah, there's at least one. I see you nodding throughout the crowd, but let me ask you, one of the interesting things about the PredictIt story is you've been through some hostile regulators who have either trimmed your markets or the no action letter fight from 2022 to 2025. How should the industry be preparing during these boom years, during this permissive environment, for a more heavy-handed regulator, say in 3 years?
That's a great question. Can you hear me back there?
DJ the mic. Oh, yes. Maybe? Oh, we got a dead mic.
How's that? Okay? Yeah. Hello, everybody. Ishi, this is a great conference. Thank you. This is so interesting, and I've run into people that I haven't seen in years and people I've never seen before. So I'm delighted to be here. So that's a great question: is how you forecast and strategize around what will probably happen, which is a crackdown by regulators, particularly from the states, coming after some of the operators, and how you plan for that. I mean, we've been, remarkable as it sounds, we've been in the prediction market space for almost 14 years. And it's not like we didn't have battles that we had to fight with the regulators, battles for survival. But we were able to, by keeping our eye on the ball and by accommodating some of the legitimate regulatory concerns, such as underage access or insider trading. And I can talk a little bit if you're interested in terms of how we approach that. But our premise was that the regulators had a legitimate interest in certain things that they were insisting upon. And it was not ideological necessarily, but rather very practical. A lot of it has to do with money. And I think the states do get some significant revenue from the regulated betting industries in their states. These go to education, they go to the general fund. Wherever that money's going, that's going to have to be accommodated for by the prediction markets and the federal regulators. It's going to be how the money's going to get divided.
So are you imagining, say, new position limits on the commercial platforms in political markets or some restrictions that you've had at PredictIt since 2014?
I think, for instance, to your point about position limits and strict identity verification, the identity verification makes it a really bad idea to do insider trading. And you combine that with position limits, and I know the institutions don't like that, and maybe that's a different type of prediction market. But for the retail prediction markets, if you put a position limit as PredictIt has, currently it's $3,500. It was $850 for a period of time, for almost a decade, until we won our court case against the CFTC. And the settlement was to increase the position limit to $3,500. $3,500 is interesting. It gets to an interesting philosophical justification. $3,500 was not just pulled out of the air. $3,500 is the federal individual campaign contribution limit for what a U.S. citizen can give to a congressional candidate, for instance. And it ties in from our perspective, we were the ones that proposed it. It ties into the premise that you can't buy a congressman for $3,500. And if that's suitable for limiting the incentive for bribery, it certainly is good enough for the position limit for political prediction markets in the least. And for instance, one of the other pieces of this that has not been explored is whether or not, and I'm not in the sports betting business. Those of you who follow the industry know we sold recently our DCM and DCO licenses from the CFTC to a company called Underdog, great company that's going to be taking this into the sports area. But we're in the political prediction market business. And so I think yet to be heard in the regulatory fights is the assertion, which we're going to be making, which is that these forecasts on politics at a prediction market is protected, First Amendment protected political speech. And so there are going to be lots of things that are come into play in terms of how the regulation comes down. But I think first and foremost, if you armor yourself with position limits and identity verification, you check two of the boxes, and then you take care of the money and have some kind of a split. That's probably where this is going to end up.
Take us inside the insider trading protections that PredictIt's had since 2014, because you've had to approach the more proactive layer of KYC before Kalshi began to do it and Polymarket began to do it in 24, 25. How have you approached that throughout PredictIt's operations?
Sure, great question. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Aristotle, which is a political technology company, nonpartisan. We provide compliance software and voter data and online fundraising and the like to thousands of candidates and political parties and advocacy groups in the United States. So we do a lot of work overseas as well. And so we have a grounding in compliance, but the compliance that the actual politicians have to adhere to. They got to report who gave them money and how they spent their money. So the compliance piece of this that we went into, this was 15 years ago, was we were increasingly asked for identity verification. There wasn't even an identity verification industry at the time, but we had these large databases of registered voters, licensed drivers, which were restricted in terms of how you could use this data. You can use it to market products and services, but you could use it for enforcement of government laws and regulations. And the government laws and regulations that the data was ideally suited for, better than a credit report, better than a consumer database, was enforcement of laws having to do with protection of children. So when the courts had decided when you go into a liquor store, if you produce a government-issued ID and the clerk takes care to read the government-issued ID, that 7-Eleven has an affirmative defense if it turns out that the ID was a stolen or a fraudulent ID. It's not universal, it's not a get-out-of-jail card, but that was a business that we developed. And so checking the age and the identity of people signing up in the sin industries to begin with, where there are age verification limits and strict ones that are enforced, that was the first area that we went into. And what are the sin industries? It's adult, it's tobacco, it's booze, it's hemp.
It's Vegas.
It's Vegas. So those are the industries, and today we process on behalf of the state-regulated gaming companies, FanDuel, DraftKings, and the like. We process approximately, on any given day, 50% of the onboards that take place in the regulated sports betting industry. And we have to have a license in the states that permit online sports betting. We, Aristotle, providing this service, has to have a license. So that's how we got into the identity verification business. What happens is it also is an excellent way to deter insider trading, for the reasons I talked about a little bit earlier.
I have one more insider question for you before we move on to research. There's a sort of fault line in the prediction market industry between people who want all of the insiders trading so you get your accurate forecast, and people who still believe there is certain information that should be classified, remain outside of the markets. How does PredictIt approach that issue?
Well, we think of it a little bit differently, and some of this is you'll understand, because you understand how we got into this business. We think there's a difference between insider trading and smart money. And the smart money is not doing the insider trading, because you're going to get caught on the stock market eventually, and the surveillance and the rest of it is quite tough. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is, if you are identity verified and you are insider trading, you're going to get caught. Now, if the prediction markets step up to the plate and enforce their own identity verification, and I mean strict identity verification, you're going to do a lot to deter people, at least from trading in those prediction markets that have the identity, from insider trading in those markets.
Some of the research that PredictIt has made possible is on super forecasters, people who can be more accurate than the well-calibrated market. What sets them apart from just your regular trader off the street?
I love that question, because so PredictIt is set up and one of the ways we got approved before the Kalshi litigation, before the CFTC tried to take away the no action letter, which we received in 2014. One of the ways we got approved by the CFTC was by having an academic research purpose, a legitimate academic research purpose, which was super, because the CFTC our lawyers had found a no action letter issued by the CFTC at the time, 35 years prior, to the University of Iowa for something called Iowa Electronic Markets. And so the CFTC had a precedent where they had granted permission to operate a market without prosecution for operating an illegal market to a group of professors at University of Iowa. And we patterned PredictIt on that 35 years later and went into the CFTC with our own relationship with the university. It was Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, which had been operating a prediction market, a very good one, for about 7 years before they ran into trouble with the New Zealand regulators, who thought that it was growing too quickly. And of course, that was the complaint the CFTC, when you boil it all down, is that PredictIt grew too quickly. That I think their expression was too big for its britches. And that was their justification for trying to shut it down. Of course, we got a stay from the courts, and then we won in the Fifth Circuit. That too big for your britches is not a legitimate basis for shutting down a prediction market.
Very cool. And then what sets the super forecasters apart in terms of their behaviors and the mindset they approach the markets with?
So that's a subject. I'm sorry, I didn't answer that question before. So it's the subject of what makes for a super forecaster is studied by some of these. We have about 100 universities now that have signed up to receive the anonymized trading data that PredictIt produces, and some of these researchers are studying exactly that question. And an example is there's something about the way super forecasters are able to screen out the noise and focus instead on the actual data that's coming out of the market. That is one of the things that makes for a super forecast. These academics are studying, for instance, why is a grandmother in Kentucky better able to forecast the outcome of the New Hampshire primary than a political operative inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. So there's a certain focus on the data itself. There's a dispassionate analysis, it appears, of what is being debated. And one of the great things about these prediction markets, and I like to think this is the case with PredictIt, is it's an antidote to fake news. If you are consuming fake news and you are placing your bet based upon fake news, you're going to lose your money. And so it's a corrective for the kind of fake news or incorrect information that floods our consciousness today.
That's one of the interesting things about prediction markets, and I want to get your take on this. Throughout 2025, and as they started to really grow, and even in 24 during the election attention, I was thinking, okay, there are going to be people who use these for forecasting, but if prediction markets are going to be these not media outlets, but sources for forecasting and information, they're going to get the same accusations of fake news that mainstream journalists did, maybe under the term market manipulation, if it's, whether it's present in the market or not. How should prediction markets that want to be used as a data point in these mainstream stories and mainstream political coverage address those types of perception issues that journalists have been struggling with for over a decade now?
That's a interesting question, and it's not an easy answer to that. But I think actually Kalshi's doing a good job with this. We're in the first inning of the first ball game of the season right now. So take this for what it means. Prediction markets, among other things that they're going to disrupt, are going to disrupt the traditional media, and not in a bad way. The deals that, for instance, Kalshi has signed with CNN and some of the others, these are not, to my knowledge anyway, exclusive deals. These are going to be replicated through lots of news organizations. And it's not a new concept that news organizations, look at the problem that news organizations have. They have to, it's very expensive to produce quality political reporting and reporting on world affairs. It's very expensive to run a newsroom. It's very expensive to have reporters doing a good job trying to track down the facts and the sources and attributing it and not getting sued, all the rest of that. Prediction markets give news organizations, which should be operating their own prediction market, if not licensing from Kalshi or Poly or PredictIt or someone else. This is a way for a news organization to monetize their quality content. If you present a reader of The Economist with the opportunity to bet on whether something's going to happen that Economist reporter is writing about in the editorial content, to actually take action and to get some skin in the game, that's a great way for that news organization to generate revenue. So I think news organizations are natural partners of prediction markets.
What's some of the emerging research that's coming out that prediction markets, especially in this commercial boom in the last 2 years, have made possible?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What's some of the emerging research coming out? Like, I know there's some interesting research about when markets fail and when they don't live up to the antidote to misinformation promise or even become liquid in the first place.
So if you look at the mishaps, and when prediction markets don't, I mean, one of the professors has been studying exactly this. What happens when these markets don't necessarily work? Now, keep in mind, when you say the guy has a 40% chance of getting elected, that means 40% of the time he's supposed to get elected, right? So that's not a failure of the market necessarily. That's, that is what it is. The markets, some of the failures are self-inflicted. So lack of identity verification, we talked about that. Another one would be questions poorly designed, right? So questions poorly designed are, where they're ambiguous, I mean, this really is prediction market 101. You have to have a binary outcome, and it has to be clear, and the traders have to understand when it pays off and when it doesn't, if you're going to have any hope of building trader confidence. So the mishap, and then there are also categories, I think. This is not so much in the area of failure, but it fails all of us in this room. To have markets on certain topics, we've been through battles with the CFTC in terms of what's an appropriate political market, and in some cases, they have a point. And some of the markets that can be dangerous, some of the markets that these companies will put up are clearly in bad taste, and I don't judge other people's taste, but this is part of operating in the United States with the CFTC and with the Congress of 435 people who have strong opinions, especially around Election Day. You have to pay attention. You got to pay attention to how what you're doing is being received, because if you don't, you're going to suffer. It may not be constitutional, it may not be right, but the fact of the matter is you got to be careful.
So don't look for kidnapping markets on PredictIt anytime soon.
I don't think you're going to see any of those on PredictIt, yeah.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about where markets fail is going back to media organizations using prediction markets in the course of their reporting. I mean, they may, look at an 80-20 market in a primary race and say, hey, look, it looks like Ken Paxton's got this on election night. And of course, he did it, and that race is going to a runoff now. What do media outlets, journalists who are new to prediction markets need to know about, the real world operating outside of the markets to, use the appropriate nuance when using them as a data point?
Well, I mean, we use polling as a counterpoint to that. So we use focus groups at PredictIt, and we use quantitative polling, so regular public opinion polling. And we're involved in lots of political campaigns that use our data to pick a random sample. Polling is really hard to do well. It costs about $50,000 to do a good sample poll for a statewide Senate campaign. And you think about the polling. Polling is good at telling you why people feel the way they do, especially focus groups. Polling is not really very good at predicting what's going to happen 9 months from now at the ballot box. It's really actually really poor, because you're asking people, think about it, you're asking people, if the election were held tomorrow, for whom would you vote? Well, the election is not being held tomorrow, right? And the person you're asking, unfortunately, may not even be voting. So markets don't have that's a very low bar for prediction markets to exceed, and they do regularly. But prediction markets don't tell you why people feel the way they do, the way polling does. If you want to get behind why you're voting for this person, focus groups and political and polling are better, but not prediction markets and that. So these two things are two sides of the coin.
And when we talk about market failure or self-inflicted wounds in the prediction market industry in terms of market design, I know that there's a 60-40 race. Going to the 40% candidate is not necessarily a market failure, even if they've got a 20% chance to win, like Donald Trump did in 2016. I mean, 1 out of 5 times he should win, and the one time he did in 2016, of course. What is an actual market failure from a prediction market standpoint?
Oh, what's an actual failure?
Mm-hmm. When can you say that it actually failed?
Well, I mean, I think if you've got, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the prediction market, right? If you're trying to make money, failure may be defined one way. If you're trying to forecast what's going to happen, it may be another, and therein lies the rub, right? If the market is being set up to try to forecast what is going to happen 9 months from now, a success may be a different measure than if you're trying to accomplish something else with this. If you're trying to make money in a prediction market, that's your only goal. You have a third criteria for what's successful. You would like to be in a market where, where there's a long shot, there are long shots.
And then one more question before we start to open it up for Q&A. I know Professor Coleman Strumpf is doing some work on prediction market research. What's some of his recent findings? Isn't he working on something interesting right now?
Yeah, so Coleman is the quintessential university professor. I don't know if you've seen him. He's from Wake Forest University. He's one of our original. He actually was one of the, if I'm not mistaken, one of the plaintiffs in our lawsuit against the CFTC. There were others.
One of a good dozen.
What's that?
One of a good dozen plaintiffs who hopped on board.
Yeah, and news organizations, right? So let me do an aside here. So news organizations came on the lawsuit against the CFTC when they tried to take away the no action letter. And why would a news organization come? Well, news organizations, many of the consumers of prediction market data are not necessarily the traders themselves, the beneficiaries. It's not necessarily just the traders. It's news organizations that use the odds in their reporting on the subject that's also the subject of a prediction market. The way they have used polling in the past and attempt to continue to do so. So Coleman's looking at things like, what makes for a super forecaster, what we talked about. Coleman is also looking at what happens when a market fails. So what types of and we talked about this, if a question is constructed poorly, or if there's incomplete information. One of the things Coleman's looking at is what happens when there's incomplete information coming into the market, or incorrect information coming into the market. Well, yeah, it's going to affect the odds.
Or a mismatch between a market title and the market description. That's a classic one.
Yep.
It's a 2025 classic.
Yep.
Well, cool. We got about 10 minutes for Q&A. So if there's, we've already got a few. Mick, go ahead. Here comes the microphone. If you shout it out, I'll just repeat it to them too.
Me now?
There it is.
Hey,
All right,
Nick Bransfield from Kingston Chase Consulting. John, could you talk about the DCM application process for Aristotle Exchange, particularly how long it took and how much it cost?
Sure. It's 4 years. It could have been 2 years if we had been willing to have a big law firm do it for us. The process itself was quite logical and disciplined once we understood what the language was, what the handshake was, all the rest of it. The staff that processed the application, we found them to be receptive to, if they were helpful in terms of, well, you need to do this way, not the other way. But it was 4 years in our case, and right now I think if we were to do it again, it would probably be a 2-year process, and it'd be a couple $1 million in fees to the experts that we used to help us. Now, people are waiting to see what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. So one of the interesting things about the DCM and the DCO license, of which we got both, is that once you've gotten the license, you can sell the license. So there's a lively market, and the prices fluctuate in terms of buying the DCMs and the DCOs. But I would encourage, if you want to bet on the future regulatory structure in the United States, at least, being structured around DCMs and DCOs, which a lot of people are assuming is going to be the case, there's no substitute. You either need to buy a DCM, DCO license from somebody who's not going to use it, or you got to go get it yourself. And that's a question. It's a question of, do you want to spend, let's say you can do it in 2 years. How valuable is that time to get into the market? The forecasts I see in terms of the Supreme Court, if this goes to the Supreme Court, is sometime 2028, 2027. I don't think anything's really going to happen from a regulatory standpoint, except for the state litigation against the Kalshi and Poly markets and some of the others. I don't think anything's really going to happen until the general election, after the general election. But it seems to me kind of silly that some in Congress are lining up against prediction markets because they, if you're hanging your hopes on convincing the American voters that prediction markets are a threat to democracy, which is how some of these people are trying to frame this, you should not be in the business of trying to win elections, because that's not going to fly.
That doesn't touch gas prices, does it?
What's that?
That doesn't touch gas prices, does it?
No, gas prices are a little more visceral. So I don't think this is going to become an issue in the 2028 presidential election, but who knows?
Hey, John. Here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just had a question, think about if I have to buy DCM and DCO, what would be the transfer compliances from the dormant DCM, DCO point of view?
From the what?
Oh, how do you transfer, if you buy a license, how do you transfer it over?
It's a fairly straightforward process. There's no restriction.
Okay.
So it's a fairly straightforward. I was surprised to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the process. I mean, I don't want to discourage people from pursuing the path. We were fortunate in that we won the lawsuit before we had a DCM or DCO. And it was because, in large part, it's because the attempt to shut down PredictIt was so inept that it was a slam dunk when it got to the Court of Appeals. But we operate under certain restrictions. Some people in this room are going to say, you know, I can't live with a $3,500 position limit. I've got guys who want to roll. Now, there's some people in the room here, friends of mine who do place very large bets, not on PredictIt, but do place very large bets and do very well as they should in these prediction markets. That's not what PredictIt is. PredictIt is, we operate, we're focused